Professional wrestlers take their lives in their own hands and put them into the hands of their opponents every time they step through those ropes. Away from the arena, however, a wrestler's life is left up to fate, and occasionally, whether it be due to an illness or accident, they come perilously close to entering that big Royal Rumble in the sky. These guys are made of stern stuff, mind, and even when they're on death's door, they manage to kick out at 2 and live to fight another day. Well, pretend to fight anyway. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestlers who almost died, but came back. Join us. Number 10, Brock Lesnar. You could be forgiven for thinking that nothing could truly hurt the cyborg Viking space lord freak of nature that is Brock Lesnar. The next big thing came close to death in the main event of WrestleMania 19, when he came up short on a shooting star press and landed at a bad angle, but luckily escaped with just a concussion. Brock had an altogether more serious brush with tragedy when he contracted diverticulitis in 2009. Lesnar was the UFC heavyweight champion, and on a family trip to Canada when he realized that something was seriously wrong, and after an agonizing stay in a local hospital that wasn't equipped to deal with his situation, was driven 4 hours to another facility in North Dakota. As Brock himself recounted things, it was a life or death situation as he lay there in excruciating pain and suffering from a very high fever. The diverticulitis ultimately required surgery, which removed 12 inches of his colon and saw Lesnar leave UFC in December of 2011. The former WWE champion may not have been fit enough to compete in the octagon, save for a one-off in 2016, but he still had options in sports entertainment and returned to WWE for a second very fruitful run in 2012. Number 9, Kenny Omega. Though he might not have the pro fighting chops of someone like Brock Lesnar, Kenny Omega's tolerance for physical abuse, which he has demonstrated during countless epic matches, also makes him come across as somewhat indestructible. But illnesses do not discriminate, and Omega, like Lesnar, found himself on the brink after contracting diverticulitis. According to reports, the Best Bout machine attributed the pain he had been experiencing toward the end of 2023 to a hernia until it became too much to bear and went to see a doctor. The doctor informed him that it was lucky when he went in when he did, because if he had waited any longer, he risked developing a blood infection that could have left things 50-50 as to whether he pulled through or not. Other reports suggest that Omega was a day or 2 away from death before seeking treatment and getting life-saving surgery that removed a large portion of his intestine. After over a year on the shelf, Kenny returned to action for New Japan and had a classic match with Gabe Kidd. Under normal circumstances, Kenny Omega having a classic match isn't really all that remarkable, but this time it was remarkable that he was wrestling at all. Number 8, William Regal. William Regal has, truth be told, come close to dying on multiple occasions. There's the belief he was on course to becoming the next wrestling statistic whilst in the throes of serious addiction during the late 90s, along with the fact that a doctor told him he had 24 hours to live after contracting sepsis once his active career was over. There was also the time he was forced to take 18 months away from the squared circle while riding high as one half of the WWE World Tag Team Champions. In February of 2003, it was discovered that Regal had become infected with a heart parasite during the company's tour of India several months earlier. Not only that, but they also discovered that the battling Brit, who had swelled up to around 265 pounds, was suffering from congestive heart failure. The health issues were serious enough that Regal could have lost his life, with doctors informing him that he would never wrestle again. Though he took a job as a road agent after recovering enough to return to work, the former Intercontinental Champion defied the odds and, after getting checked out by a top cardiologist, was cleared to get back in the ring. Number 7, Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner is another wrestler who has come close to meeting his maker more than once. One of the scariest times was in June of 2007, when Big Papa Pump found himself in a Puerto Rican hospital hours away from death. During a TNA house show on the island, Steiner was kicked hard in the throat by opponent Apollo and began coughing up blood at the hotel later that evening. Sent to a local hospital, the genetic freak was diagnosed with a torn trachea and briefed on the seriousness of the situation. Not happy with being treated in Puerto Rico, Steiner attempted to get his buddy to pick him up in a private jet. Had he done so, Steiner would have probably died, as the change in air pressure would have collapsed his lung. Instead, Scott was put in an induced coma while doctors worked on him and then remained in hospital for a couple more weeks while they drained fluid from his lungs. Steiner was eventually discharged and returned home via a cruise ship as he still couldn't fly, later admitting that the situation messed him up for some time. Nonetheless, he returned to action in late July. Number 6. Jerry Lawler. Prior to suffering a stroke in 2023, Jerry Lawler had wrestled at least one match every calendar year dating back to 1971. It's a rather extraordinary record that almost came to an end, along with the King's life in 2012. Lawler had wrestled on the September 10th episode of Monday Night Raw, teaming with Randy Orton to defeat CM Punk and Dolph Ziggler. Shortly after, the WWE Hall of Famer collapsed while providing commentary for another match in his position at the announce table. Jerry had suffered a heart attack and was clinically dead for 30 minutes while medical personnel worked on him feverishly. He underwent a heart procedure a day later and incredibly returned to his Memphis home on September 17th. Even more incredibly, he was cleared to wrestle not long after that and made his comeback on an indie show in May of 2013. He never wrestled for WWE again, as there was no way they would clear him after what had happened on their show, but he continued to work semi-regularly on the indie scene into his early 70s. Number 5. Steve Blackman. A consensus pick for the hardest bloke in the WWE locker room during the Attitude Era was Steve Blackman. And WWE stars had a reason to be wary of the Lethal Weapon, who was well versed in martial arts and didn't back down from anybody. Blackman would have had the WWE locker room on high alert a decade sooner had he not fulfilled a promise to go on a 3-week tour of South Africa before starting with Titan Sports. While touring the company, Blackman contracted malaria and dysentery, the result of a single bite from a mosquito. That single bite would lead to a 6-year ordeal that left the future hardcore champion not knowing whether he would wake up in the morning. It was only after years of intensive physical therapy, doses upon doses of antibiotics, and enough sleep to make a sloth jealous that he began to feel somewhat normal. Eventually, he began feeling not just normal but good and asked old pal Brian Pillman to put a word in with WWE. Following an 8-year hiatus, Blackman finally got his start in WWE proper in 1997 and worked a full schedule, though he continued to suffer relapses of fatigue during that first year on the road. Number 4. Brian Pillman. Blackman's buddy Brian Pillman may not have fought malaria, but he was no stranger to overcoming the odds when faced with a debilitating medical condition. Indeed, the loose cannon spent a large part of his childhood in the hospital after developing multiple throat polyps that required somewhere in the region of 40 procedures to remedy. Despite this, Pillman became quite the athlete and parlayed his athletic gifts into a career as first an American football player and then a pro wrestler. Yet the pain that Brian endured in his chosen fields led to him developing addiction. It was those vices that in the end took his life, but Pillman managed to cheat death before the Grim Reaper came calling. On April 15th, 1996, the former WCW Tag Team Champion fell asleep at the wheel of his Hummer and collided with a tree, flipping the vehicle which ejected him some 40 feet. Pillman was in a coma for a week and awoke to the news that his ankle had been completely shattered. By rights, he shouldn't have wrestled again on the fused ankle, but he did with great difficulty before sadly passing away in October of 1997 at the age of 35. Number 3. Ric Flair. Ric Flair's professional wrestling career was almost over before it really got started when he was involved in a plane crash on October 4th, 1975 that claimed the life of the pilot and left Johnny Valentine paralyzed. Though he broke his back in 3 places and was told by doctors he would never wrestle again, the Nature Boy defied expectations and shockingly returned to the ring just 3 months later. Years after his distinguished Hall of Fame career was over, Slick Rick was almost brought down by a ruptured intestine suffered in August of 2017. Contracting sepsis, Flair also suffered from respiratory heart failure, total kidney failure, and pneumonia, and was placed in a medically induced coma by doctors. It was touch and go for a moment there, with Flair's daughter Charlotte asking fans for prayers as he remained hospitalized for a month while undergoing dialysis treatments. The dirtiest player in the game not only recovered, but with a new lease on life, decided to come out of retirement in July of 2022 for his final match. As if he needed another sign to slow the hell down, Rick suffered a heart attack during the bout. Number 2. Hardcore Holly. Like him or not, there is no disputing that Bob Hardcore Holly was one tough son of a gun. The man had his arm broken while wrestling Kurt Angle and kept going. The man broke his neck while wrestling Brock Lesnar and kept going. The man had his back sliced open while wrestling Rob Van Dam and kept going. I mean, hell, the man was given the name Thurman Sparky Plug and he kept going. What almost stopped Holly from keeping going was a serious form of staph infection called MRSA, which he got in November of 2005 and was so bad it hospitalized him twice because the antibiotics weren't strong enough. Doctors not only told the former WWE Tag Team Champion that he could have ended up losing his arm, but that he was lucky to be alive at all, as he spent weeks hooked up to a machine that pumped his body full of last resort drugs to combat the infection, which had spread to the bone after surgery hadn't worked. Holly was able to return to the ring, but subsequently expressed anger at WWE for needing him on an overseas tour when they knew he was sick, only to be stuck in arbitrary battle royals every night. Number 1, Eddie Guerrero. After his hard-partying best friend and tag team partner Art Barr passed away prematurely at the age of just 28, Eddie Guerrero vowed to make some lifestyle changes when it came to his own consumption of illicit substances. Nevertheless, over time, Eddie lost his fear of the drugs and found himself cast more and more under their spell, which resulted in 2 near-fatal overdoses and a car crash that police officers couldn't believe he survived. On New Year's Eve 1998, Guerrero was partying hard, which included taking the then-popular drug GHB. Feeling hungry, he decided to drive to the store for some eggs. Making his way there at 130 miles per hour, he fell asleep at the wheel, crashed the car, and was thrown from the driver's seat. Ironically, it was actually said that the fact he wasn't wearing his seatbelt probably saved him from certain death. Still, Eddie's family were told he likely only had 48 hours to live, and then when he survived, they were told he would likely have to use a wheelchair for the rest of his life. While it seemed like wrestling again was out of the question, Guerrero was somehow able to recover and rehab enough to return just 6 months later.